Alright, it is currently 4 in the morning when I'm recording this, so if I sound like a dying old man, that's probably why. Or it's because I'm dying on the inside, but you know, trivial. One of the most infamous scenes in Nisemonogatari is the toothbrush scene featuring Karen Araragi and Koyomi Araragi. Many people have questioned the levels of incest that their virgin eyes had to look at, and even more people have questioned why they got hard while watching the scene. But nobody's asking the hard-hitting questions here, so I'm here to answer possibly the most crucial question in this scene. Is Koyomi's brushing technique optimal for arousal? For some strange reason, there aren't any studies that test the optimal brushing velocity for arousal. However, we can attempt to derive that answer for ourselves. First, let's look at what's in the mouth. One of the biggest nerves in the mouth is the trigeminal nerve. Looking at just the lower teeth, the trigeminal nerve branches off into a smaller division called the mandibular nerve. Branching off further, the mandibular nerve further divides into the inferior alveolar nerve, which is the nerve responsible for sensation in the lower teeth and gums. The inferior alveolar nerve is a huge problem for Koyomi to handle. In order to feel pressure from stroking nerves, the nerves have to have a low conduction velocity. This means that the speed in which signals are fired from the nerve to the brain is slow. An example of this is the C-tactile neurons found on hairy skin. These neurons are unmyelinated, which basically means that the signal travels slowly. With lower conduction velocity, the sensations felt are more associated with pleasure. On the other hand, higher conduction velocities are more associated with pain, temperature, and pressure. And wouldn't you know it, the inferior alveolar nerves have a fast conduction velocity of 65 meters per second. For reference, C-tactile neurons have a conduction velocity which ranges from 0.6 to 1.3 meters per second. So realistically, Koyomi stands no chance in arousing Karen with a toothbrush when brushing the lower teeth and gums. But maybe he'll have better luck brushing the upper teeth and gums. Just like the lower teeth, the upper teeth come from the trigeminal nerve. However, the nerve branches off into a smaller division called the maxillary nerve. From here, the maxillary nerve branches off into three notable branches that deliver sensations: the anterior superior alveolar nerve, the middle superior alveolar nerve, and the posterior superior alveolar nerve. All three nerves work together to deliver sensations from the upper teeth and gums to the brain, so it should be more effective in arousal, right? Wrong. In fact, these superior alveolar nerves are even faster than inferior alveolar nerves, with a conduction velocity ranging between 70 and 120 meters per second. So it looks like Koyomi really has no luck in trying to arouse Karen by brushing her teeth. But hey, I'm a fair man, and I'm trying to give Koyomi as many chances as possible here. In one scene, he was brushing the underside of her tongue, so let's look into that instead. The nerve fibers on the underside of the tongue come from the trigeminal nerve, which then branches off into the mandibular nerve. From here, the mandibular nerve branches off into the lingual nerve, which is the main component of sensory information in the underside of the tongue. A lot of the fibers of the lingual nerve are of the A delta and A beta type, which are basically myelinated fibers that have fast conduction velocities. But there is a glimmer of hope. Unlike the nerves of the upper and lower teeth and gums, about 22% of the nerve fibers in the lingual nerve are C fibers, which have a slow conduction velocity. The C fibers in the lingual nerve have an average conduction velocity of 0.6 meters per second, which is exactly the velocity we are looking for. Even though the pleasure of a toothbrush would only be 22% as effective on the underside of the tongue as opposed to hairy skin, it is the best shot that Koyomi has. Now that we finally know what regions of the mouth actually bring pleasure and arousal, it is time to assess Koyomi's technique in brushing. C-tactile neurons are C fibers with similar conduction velocities to the C fibers in the lingual nerve, so I'll make the assumption that the optimal stroking velocity for C-tactile neurons is the same as the brushing velocity of the C fibers in the lingual nerve. The optimal velocity for stroking skin to maximize pleasure and wanting is 3 centimeters per second, so let's compare that number to the velocity Koyomi brushes Karen's tongue. But first, we have to do some scaling to figure out how big everything is. I used some official artwork which states his height to be 165 centimeters, or to you filthy Americans, 1.103 times 10 to the negative 11th astronomical units. In this scene, Koyomi is about 968 pixels tall, and his forearm and hand are about 210.1 pixels long. Therefore, the forearm and hand length is 35.81 centimeters long. Since in this scene his forearm and hand were roughly 838.9 pixels long, and the toothbrush was 422 pixels long, that makes Karen's toothbrush 18.01 centimeters long. Using a higher quality image of the toothbrush, which was about 1388.4 pixels long, I determined that the length of the bristles, which was 138 pixels long, was about 1.79 centimeters long. Now to determine his brush velocity. In this scene, the brush is, for the most part, stuck in just one area of the tongue. It seems that Koyomi is more focused on lifting the tongue than actually brushing the tongue for arousal. But the brush had to have left the tongue, so let's calculate the implied velocity that the brush left her mouth. In the scene following the tongue brushing, the bristles of the toothbrush are seen swaying due to inertia. This means that the speed in which the bristles move is the same speed in which Koyomi removed the brush from her tongue. In this scene, the bristles are about 1385.4 pixels long. The rightmost group of bristles, which would have been on Karen's tongue last, moved a total of about 459.5 pixels, but the brush also moves 34.8 pixels, so the actual displacement of the bristles is 424.7 pixels. This converts to a displacement of 0.55 centimeters. The time it takes for the bristle to cover that distance is 16 frames. Since Nisemonogatari runs at 24 frames per second, this means that the velocity that Koyomi uses to remove the brush from Karen's tongue is 0.83 centimeters per second. In comparison to the optimal 3 centimeters per second, Koyomi's speed is kinda pathetic. To make matters worse, this brush velocity was held for a distance of 2.68 centimeters, so he was brushing the underside of her tongue for a painfully long 3.23 seconds. This means that out of the combined 1 minute, 40 seconds, and 10 frames that Koyomi actively spends brushing Karen's teeth, only 3.2% of that time is effective in arousing Karen, and even then, it isn't done as optimally as it could be. All in all, Koyomi is an absolute beta male. He spends most of his time brushing Karen's teeth and gums, which aren't even that sensitive to pleasure. If anything, he's provoking pressure and pain in the teeth and gums. Trying to brush the teeth and gums for arousal isn't gonna work, and the best shot that he had was under the tongue, which only would have been 22% as effective as stroking the skin. And even then, he couldn't brush the tongue with the optimal velocity. But you might find yourself asking what else Koyomi could have done to arouse Karen with a toothbrush. If I were to be in his position, I would try to shove that toothbrush down her throat and let her deep throat. In conclusion, through extensive research and my own analysis, I have discovered that Koyomi's brushing technique is, in fact, not optimal for arousal.